Everyone knew three things about Sophie Vale. She hated the glass elevators, she refused to say hello, and she could make an entire floor disappear with a single scream. They said nobody could handle the billionaire's daughter. They said the staff should vanish when she visited. They said, "Not your job." Eli Morales didn't vanish. He had a key ring that could open almost every door in Vale Tower, a mop that squeaked when the floors were clean, and a daughter who still asked for bedtime stories he read over FaceTime, sitting on an upside-down bucket in the broom closet because it was the only quiet place on the night shift. On the morning it began, the lobby was a lake of glass and light. Eli's cart hummed as he guided it around a spiral of latte foam one young executive had dropped and kept walking away from. He pressed the mop head down and breathed in lemon cleaner. He liked evidence turning into shine. "Leave it," the security guard muttered, eyes flicking to the revolving doors. "VIP coming through, not your job to be seen." Eli wrung the mop again. "Spill not going to move itself." "Not your job," the guard repeated, softer now, as if the words were a warning and a prayer. The doors spun. Cameras clicked from nobody knows where. Alexandra Vale, the Alexandra Vale, strode in on silent heels, a flurry of assistants trailing her like sparrows. Her jaw was set, her eyes already on the elevator bank. Beside her, half a step behind, was Sophie, small and rigid in a white cardigan, hands pressed over headphones the color of the sky before rain. The elevator chimed. Sophie froze. The assistants tightened. The guard swore under his breath. "Stairs," Alexandra said, crisp and gentle, the way people speak when they want to be both. "We can take the stairs, honey." Sophie didn't move, her chest raced. The lobby's light made everything louder. A paper-thin voice, "No." The security guard had already reached for his radio. "We're going to need—" Eli set the mop against the cart and took 3 steps, slow, like approaching a bird. He knelt so his eyes were level with Sophie's shoes. They were scuffed silver, tiny galaxies scabbed at the toes. "Floor's wet," he said to no one. Then to her, softer, "The bell is bossy, huh?" Her eyes flicked, quick, curious. Then they shut. Alexandra didn't look at Eli, she looked at the floor. The assistants drew a careful circle, making a room out of their bodies so the lobby would stop being a stadium. "Sir," the security guard said, "this is not your job." Eli finished for him, still kneeling. He didn't touch the girl. He touched his keys, metal against his palm, the familiar weight steadying his own breath. "Hey," he told them, a little louder now. "Can someone hit the switch on the chime, just for a minute?" "Do it," Alexandra said without looking up. Silence fell like a blanket, the elevators still shone. The bossy bell took a breath and held it. Sophie cracked one eye. The world didn't shout back. "Okay," Eli breathed. "Better." He stood, not too fast, and backed his cart away. The mop's wheels squeaked, a small animal sound. He could feel the heat of the assistants' looks. He could feel the security guard's radio humming with comments. Sophie took a step, then another. She kept her headphones on. When they reached the stairs, she put her hand on the rail, then stopped again, looking up like she couldn't count the flights in her head. "Hang on," Eli said, before anyone could decide for her. He plucked a small brass key from his ring. It had a yellow tag looped through it, a color that had nothing to do with the company's brand and everything to do with a sticky note his daughter had once pressed onto his lunchbox. He held the key up so it glinted in the glass. "This one opens a door where the noise is quieter, just a few steps away. You want to see?" Something passed over Alexandra's face. Surprise, then calculation, then a mother's fear. "Who are you?" "Custodial," he said. "Eli." "Sir," the guard warned again. "Not your job," someone muttered. Eli kept his gaze on Sophie, not the queen or the court. "You don't have to," he told her, voice low enough that it could be for the keys, the mop, or his own hands. "But if you do, you get to hold the key." Her eyes opened all the way. "Key," she said. He nodded as if she'd made a tactical suggestion in a boardroom. "Key." ACT-1, set up the way Vale Tower worked was simple. Things gleamed, people moved fast. The higher the floor, the softer the doors. Eli had learned where the squeaks lived. He learned that lemon cleaner soothed him like mint gum. He learned the night security guard's crossword habit and the barista's second job, in which potted plants craved attention like children and which ones thrived on neglect. The building's engines were people. They ran better when someone noticed them. He was a quiet man with a loud key ring. His one indulgence was the tape he'd wrapped around a single tag. Yellow, a color that made him think of the first paper star his daughter, Maya, had left on his pillow when they'd moved to the one bedroom 2 buses from school. He still found the glue on his palm, sometimes hours after he left home. He didn't mind. "What are you doing?" the assistant hissed now as he held up that yellow tagged key. "Showing her a door," he said. Liability, the security guard said. Safety, Alexandra answered, surprising all of them. Eli walked toward a side corridor. He didn't rush and he didn't look back to see if the girl followed because nothing locks a door like the word hurry. At the end of the hall was a room everyone ignored because it sounded like breath, the HVAC intake closet. He slid the key in and turned it. The click was small, but to a certain kind of nervous system, it sang. He opened the door and stepped aside. Cool air brushed his face, carrying the smell of dust and metal and a note of lemon that had seeped into his skin. Sophie peered in, suspicious of tricks that was. He held out the key. It gleamed against his work-rough fingers. Here, he said, yellow means quiet. Why yellow? She asked, voice thin and fierce at once. Because it looks like a little sun, he said. Her fingers were cold when they closed around the metal. She stepped in. He didn't follow. He stayed outside like a guard dog who knew the job wasn't to bark. The assistants hung back. Alexandra stood still, hand on the doorframe, impossibly expensive watch ticking. Inside, the room wasn't special. A filter, a fan, a hum like someone shushing you gently from a distance. But when the door clicked again, it didn't sound like a trap. It sounded like a choice. Sophie came out with her shoulders lower. She handed him the key the way a person gives back a borrowed book, thumb lingering on the ridged teeth. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. Eli didn't mind the words people thought were required. He liked the words people couldn't find. We have a meeting, Alexandra said, air returning to her voice like oxygen to a mask. She glanced at Eli, looked at the key, then down, a flick fast as a nod at his name tag. Thank you, Eli. He tucked the key back on his ring and picked up his mop. He couldn't stop smiling as he pushed the cart away. It felt dangerous, that smile, like he'd opened a door he didn't have clearance for. He was already late for the upper floors. The interns would have crushed croissants into the carpet by now. The memo had said, move invisibly. The building practically shouted, be a ghost. He didn't know it yet, but he had just broken the first rule. ECT-2A, escalation. The pattern went like this. Sophie came on Tuesdays and Thursdays when Alexandra ran the short meetings that still outran day care. The elevators dinged like impatient birds. The lobby held its breath. The staff learned the routes that kept them away from the path between the front door and the executive stairs. On Tuesday, Eli was restocking the restroom when he heard the bell and the small voice and the tightening silence. He wiped his hands, left the paper towels half folded, and walked, not all the way to the center this time, but to the edge of the lobby where the sound bounced off glass and came back like a slap. He didn't go to her every time. He wasn't a solution. But once, when her hands flattened against the wall and her breathing turned into something that rhymed with panic, he raised the key like a lighthouse. Yellow, he said. She nodded. They took the side hall. The door sang. No one wrote anything down, but a map formed anyway. The assistants adjusted their flight pattern. The security guard learned to snap off the bell faster. One of the receptionists, a gray-haired woman who smelled faintly of peppermint, taped a tiny star, cut from a post-it, next to the HVAC closet handle. Not your job, Eli thought when he saw the star, and then again, yes it is, and he didn't know whose voice belonged to which answer. He had his own map. Mondays and Wednesdays, he worked until 3, grabbed a bus, and slipped into the school cafeteria where children's voices ricocheted like marbles. He sat at the back table with his phone in his palm until 3:15, when Maya would appear with her knapsack scrunched into a ball and her hair crooked from the headband she refused to admit bothered her. He'd wave. She'd lift a hand without looking, which meant she'd had a day. How was it? He'd ask and she'd say, Dad, and the syllable would be tired and full and enough. On the days his shift ran long, he watched the clock like a streetlight. At 2:40, his chest tightened. At 2:45, he felt the edges of himself again, like a person who had to borrow a body that didn't quite fit. He made a promise in those minutes, not out loud. He wasn't that kind of man. He promised that he would never let anyone tell his kid her feelings were problems to solve. He promised she'd always have a door. So when Sophie stared too long at his keys one Thursday in the hallway, chin tilted like defiance and fear were friends who kept tripping over each other, he slipped the ring off his belt and let her feel the weight. So many, she said. Every door in this place has a story, he said. What about that one? She asked, pointing to a key he had never used, slimmer than the others, with a tag that had lost its writing and probably its purpose. That one opens something forgotten, he said. She considered that. Sometimes I wish I was forgotten, she whispered. It was so quiet Eli almost thought he'd imagined it. He didn't answer. He wasn't qualified. But he angled the keys so the yellow tag caught the light. He made sure the security camera could see his hands and the way he wasn't touching her. He made sure to exhale before he spoke again because his mouth had gone dry. Me too, he said, and it was the most honest thing he'd said in a week. At the corner, Alexandra appeared, her heels slowed. She took in the keys, the kid, the janitor. Eli waited for the snap. Back to the conference room, soft, she said, voice neutral enough that only a mother could have walked it. Mr. Morales, he supplied. Mr. Morales, thank you, he nodded. His fingers itched to twist the ring that hung around his neck under his shirt, the one that no longer had a match. He didn't. He picked up his cart instead. The wheels squeaked. He decided the noise sounded like a toy he used to fix when Maya was small, one he'd learned to love for its imperfection. He told himself that was enough, and then the building made that impossible. 2 days later, an event. Not a gala, no speeches, but cameras, donors, a wall of vases screaming with white flowers. The lobby looked so clean it almost was alive. Eli was halfway through polishing the brass rail when he heard the first crack of sound, the one that only people who have heard it enough times can recognize a second before everyone else does. Sophie had her back against the pillar. Her hands were flat. The elevator dinged, and the echo ricocheted into her ribs. The assistants were already forming the circle. Alexandra was already going to one knee. A donor in a navy suit was already whispering, as if whispers weren't another kind of noise. Not here, someone said. Not now. Not her, someone else replied, cruel without meaning to be. Eli's feet were moving before his brain picked a verb. He held up the key like a standard in a parade. Sophie, he said. Her eyes found him like she had a compass. Yellow, she said, voice cracking in the middle like ice in a glass. Yeah, they turned. The donor's whisper followed. Who is he? Nobody, someone answered. Eli pretended not to hear that. He turned the key. The door chest-breathed. Sophie walked into the hush like it had been waiting for her. This time she didn't come out right away. He checked the clock. He checked the crowd. He could feel security like weather behind him. He kept his hand on the handle, not pushing, just present. Alexandra stood an arm's length away, eyes on the seam of the door as if she could will it wider. He could hear it just under the fan, small, deliberate breaths. 1, 2, 3. Then her voice, not my job. He frowned, startled. The phrase meant too many things around here. Not my job to be brave every second, she said, as if she could hear him frown from the other side. I can be brave for 3. Her mother closed her eyes. The assistants held their own lungs ransom. 3 breaths later, the door clicked. Sophie came out with a streak of dust on her white sleeve. Her cheeks were damp but calm. She looked at Eli's hands then, like she was counting the lines in his palms. Can I keep the yellow? She asked. He didn't hesitate. He slid the tag off and waited for Alexandra to argue. None came. He looped the plastic through the chain of a small pendant around Sophie's neck, a tiny silver house with a door you could pretend to open, and snapped it shut. If you do, he said, you have to promise to use it for doors that help. Deal? Deal, she said, solemn as court. She touched the tag. It made a small, happy click. ACT2B, the heart moment that night on his break, Eli sat on the back steps where smokers went to lie to themselves. He didn't smoke. He listened to the hum of the city and his phone ring twice before he answered, because he always waited just long enough to pretend Maya had called him first. Dad, she said, that same tired, full as always. You eat? He asked. No, she said, but she was smiling this time. He could hear it. Ms. Patel gave us a worksheet with keys and doors. You had to match which key opened which door. I knew them all. He thought of a yellow tag. I bet you did. Why, you sound like you're crying, she asked, blunt as children are when they think love and curiosity are synonyms. I'm not, he said. He was a little. He wiped his cheek with the back of his wrist. It came away smelling like lemon. I'm just tired. Okay, she said, softer now, but try. When he hung up, there was a shadow on the step, a rectangle of light where the door cracked open. Alexandra stepped out, alone for once. Power sat on her like a jacket she wore because someone told her it would be cold. I don't usually come out here, she said. The admission sounded foreign in her mouth, like a language she hadn't practiced. She held something between her fingers, the yellow tag. She wanted me to tell you she slept. For 20 minutes. I didn't know she could sleep here. The room's quiet, he said. She says you gave her a rule. Alexandra's lips moved around the word like it was unfamiliar. Doors that help, he nodded. Keys are for permission, not for control. She looked out at the alley's slice of sky. I have tried everything money can buy, Mr. Morales, specialists, coaches, treatments, techniques. She is complicated. She's 8, he said. Alexandra's hand fell to her side. The yellow tag swung. You have a kid. Yeah, she's the reason you, Alexandra stopped. Swallowed perfection for a moment and let something human step forward. You look like you understand. Eli twisted the ring on his chain. He didn't say why it hung there and not on a finger. He didn't say how he'd learned to count breaths in grocery store aisles, how he'd learned which fluorescent bulbs buzzed like a mosquito nobody else could hear. He didn't say how it felt to have a job that asked him not to exist when he had a person at home who needed him to be a solid thing in a world that went fluid without warning. He said, "Sometimes quiet is a door, not a room." Alexandra nodded, as if he'd just given her a brief. "We have a donor event Tuesday," she said slowly. "Press, partners, I need her to make it to the second floor 3 minutes before the cameras." "If I could guarantee that door." "You can't guarantee people," he said gently. "Only the doors." She picked up the tag. It flashed yellow. "Then help me build the doors." ACT3, transformation. The decision didn't happen with a speech. It happened at 6:10 a.m. when Eli took a screwdriver from his cart and removed the metal plate that turned the HVAC closet handle from a circle to a hook. He stuck a sticker under the knob, a small circle he'd cut from a yellow file folder, and wrote "Quiet Room" on a piece of tape that wouldn't fool a lawyer but made the door tell the truth. He took a picture. He didn't send it. He slid the phone back into his pocket and went back to his route. He adjusted the cart wheels so they didn't squeak. He asked the receptionist what her name was and used it. He put a spare pair of earplugs in his pocket next to the ring, next to a folded bill he meant to save. By noon, the building knew word travels fast when it gives people permission. "You can't designate space," the security guard said, frowning like an uncle pretending to be stern. "That's not your job," Eli finished, smiling. He pulled a laminated sign from his cart. He'd made it at the copy center across the street and paid with quarters. "Quiet Room." Yellow means safe. "Please respect the door." But the door seemed to want a name. "Liability," the guard said, but his voice lacked teeth. "Humanity," the receptionist said under her breath, and walked away before anyone could make her repeat it. Resistance came in emails Eli wasn't copied on. It came in a man in a tie he didn't know telling him to take down the sign. It came in Alexandra herself, in a meeting room with glass walls, inviting him to speak, and then regretting the invitation when he did. "You want me to add a line item to the renovation budget for what exactly?" the facilities manager asked, baffled and annoyed. "Quiet pockets," Eli said. He stood in his uniform, keys heavy at his hip. "Not big, just enough to show people they can breathe. Signs that tell the truth, bells that don't boss." "Neuro," Alexandra began, then stopped herself. "The building is intense, and I like it that way." "We need to make room for people who," "For people," Eli said, and he hadn't planned on that word sounding like an anchor. The manager rubbed his forehead. "How much?" Eli had written the number on his palm. It was smaller than they expected and larger than he could afford. "Less than your flower budget for one event." "Snark isn't helpful," the manager said. "I'm not being snarky," Eli said. "I'm being cheap." It didn't win him friends. It did, however, win him a corner of the budget nobody had planned to spend, because it came out of miscellaneous, and you can hide a lot of grace under that word if you try. He didn't just talk, he showed. He turned his cart into a demonstration. He lined the rattling supplies in the tray with a cut piece of foam so they didn't clink. He replaced the wheels. He whispered, "Excuse me," in the elevator instead of pressing the button that made it beep when it stopped at a floor. He asked the intern, who always moved too fast to walk with him, for 30 seconds and then said, "Did you hear that? Your shoes talk, they say, see me." Eli created ripples without splashes. He brought earplugs in a small glass jar with a yellow ribbon and put them on the reception desk. He put a small basket of fidget stones by the security station. He taped a simple map behind the counter, a yellow dot. "You are here," a yellow circle, "Quiet door." The receptionist said his name out loud when she told someone where to go, a sentence that made something in Eli's chest stand up straighter. "Not your job," the building had said. "It is now," his hands said as they measured, taped, and trusted. The pushback made sense. The night foreman told him kindly that he was making people uncomfortable. The HR manager sent an email reminding staff about protocols and boundaries, and that only authorized personnel could adjust signage. Eli kept going. He surprised himself by not apologizing. He surprised himself by asking, when he dropped the recycling on the executive floor, if Alexandra would be comfortable having the bell turned off for a window of 3 minutes on Tuesday. "If it helps her," she said, "do it. And if it doesn't," he said, meeting her eyes through the glass, "you can miss a thing or two, Ms. Vale. The cameras will wait." He walked out expecting to be fired. He felt clean about it. ACT4, Resolution Tuesday was clear enough to hurt. The building gleamed like it had a fever. The donors smiled as if their faces might crack if they didn't. The photographers circled. The elevator bell sat quiet, its mouth covered gently with tape. At 10:57, the doors spun. Alexandra walked in, heels muted so well that Eli had somehow convinced himself she hovered. The assistants flocked. The security guard hovered near the quiet room hall like a goalie who just believed in defense for the first time. Sophie stepped into the lobby like she was testing the gravity. Headphones, white cardigan, the yellow tag hung from her pendant, a small sun against a small house. Her gaze scanned the lobby, landing spots, escape routes, doors. It found Eli. He didn't move toward her. He didn't lift the key. He waited, hands steady at his sides, as if waiting were an art he'd trained in. Yellow. He asked when she was close enough to hear only if she wanted to. She shook her head. 3 breaths, she said, and he grinned before he could stop himself. The elevator had never been so quiet. No ding, no hum amplified by a bell, just the whispered slide of doors. Eli counted with her, not out loud. 1, 2, 3. Sophie stepped in. Alexandra put her hand between the doors the way mothers do, as if she could stop metal with bones. The doors slid shut like a secret, finally learning how to be gentle. On the second floor, the cameras waited. They got their pictures. Some people would say later that the moment was nothing. A child walking into a room, a person doing a job, a door sliding. Those people had never pressed a forehead to a hallway and tried to tell their body that a bell wasn't a threat. When the elevator opened again, Sophie did not return to the lobby. She walked to the quiet room and touched the tape sign with one finger. Then, solemn as ceremony, she took the yellow tag off her necklace and looped it through the new key that Alexandra held, engraved by someone with too many resources and not enough time, quiet across the head in tiny letters. Sophie looked over the glass railing of the second floor landing to where Eli stood with his cart below. She held up the key. He held up his own. The building applauded. First one person, then another, then the kind of sound that says we all saw it and we want Joy to have evidence. Social proof is a wave, and it lifted all the small boats that had been hugging the rocks for years. After the press left, the donors drifted, and the assistants exhaled. Alexandra came down the stairs with Sophie 2 steps ahead, the way children lead when you let them think it was their idea. Sophie walked up to Eli. She held out the key like a medal. "For you," she said. He shook his head. "It's yours," she frowned. "You said keys are for permission, not control. I can ask you to hold it." "That's permission." He took it, because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is accept a child's logic. The key was warm from her hand. It smelled faintly like peppermint, a detail he filed away for no reason at all other than he liked that it existed. "Thank you," he said. She nodded, businesslike. Then behavioral shift, the kind that makes a person a witness to their own heart. She reached for the handle of his cart. "Can I help?" "Not your job," the security guard said, half laughing. "Maybe it is," Alexandra murmured, eyes on her daughter's hands, on the mop, on the man whose quiet had rearranged their days. Eli took a breath, then another, then another. He didn't cry in the lobby. He didn't need to. Something in him eased, a knot that had become so much a part of being alive that he'd stopped trying to loosen it. The next week, small yellow circles bloomed around the building like dandelions nobody wanted to pull. On the 3rd floor, a quiet corner with soft chairs. On the 5th, a nook with a sign that said, "Yellow means safe." People used them, not just Sophie, a developer who'd started grinding his teeth in his sleep, a delivery driver on his 3rd double shift, a receptionist who was 6 months pregnant and suddenly terrified of the elevator at lunch. On Friday, Eli opened his locker and found a box. Inside, a new key ring. Heavy but balanced, the keys arranged like a chorus instead of a clatter. The tag was yellow. The engraving, MORALES Building Care. A folded note lay underneath thick paper that cost more than he made in an hour. It read, "Kindness isn't magic, it's just the first door." No signature, he didn't need one. 3 months later, the lobby held a different event, not a gala, a gathering. The sign behind the podium said, "Quiet is a door," in letters that made even noisy people look twice. Maya stood beside him, holding a paper cup of lemonade and wearing a sticky star on it. "Dad," she said, tugging his sleeve, "that's the lady from the elevators." "Ms. Vale," he said. "Alexandra, and that's the girl." "Sophie," he said. He was proud he could say her name and mean a person, not a problem. Sophie saw him and waved. The wave was small, like a secret handshake you do with your eyes. She walked to the podium, stood on a box someone had placed there quietly, and said into the mic, "Yellow means safe." The room laughed, soft and clean. Alexandra rested her hands on the podium edge like she was holding up something heavy and didn't care if anyone saw. 3 breaths, Sophie added. Then we go. The audience didn't stand because common sense had taught them one person's victory isn't always a spectacle. Instead, they did something more suspicious. They listened. After, when the lights were unnecessary and the flowers were an afterthought and the cameras had been put in their cases, Sophie walked up to Maya, looked at the sticky star on her cheek, and said, "Nice." "You too," Maya said, pointing to the tag on the key now housed in a small glass shadow box near the quiet room sign. Yellow meant safe. A small handprint was pressed in the corner of the glass. Eli watched the 2 girls not talk about big things. He watched them share air. He watched Alexandra turn to him and say something he hadn't known he was waiting to hear. "You were right," she said. "We can't guarantee people, but we can make it easier to be one." He nodded because sometimes the truth doesn't need more words. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out his phone. He took a picture of the yellow tag in the glass. He sent it to himself and saved it in a folder called Doors. When he went back to his cart, he found the mop leaning against it at a deliberate angle. Sophie had propped it there. On the handle, a sticky note in messy block letters read, "Let me help." He glanced up. She was watching to make sure he saw. He straightened, then handed her the mop. She took it. Her hands were sure. They stood together, a billionaire's daughter and a single dad janitor, in a lobby built to intimidate, and moved the mop in easy arcs, leaving a clean line that anyone could follow. The building watched. And then, quietly, it changed. He clipped his keys to his belt. They felt different now, not heavier, honest. He traced the shape of the yellow tag through the glass with one finger and thought of every door that had ever felt like a wall until someone said, "Try." He tied his apron. He picked up his cart. He looked at Sophie and at his daughter. He looked at Alexandra leaning one hip on a table and letting someone else carry the box of folders for once. "Not your job," the guard said as he passed, eyes kind. Eli smiled. "Seeing each other," he said. "It's everybody's." He turned, the light catching the brass, the yellow shining like a small sun he could fit in his hand. And then, as if the building finally learned how to greet the people inside it, the elevator chimed once, soft as a thank you.